After I finished the last live video meal, I had Fudume, and then Grace drove Rohana to my house and from whence Mom was kind enough to pick us three up and take us to our rollerblading destination. We started at Watson Lake and braided through Bellevue all the way to the trailhead, or to the trail end down at the Environmental Learning Center, and this was our route. Honestly, it was pretty great. We listened through my Ultimate playlist at the start, and then just as that finished, Grace ran out of stamina, and so we chilled at the river and waited for Mom to pick her up before me and Johanna continued on. Now at this point, I'd like to express my deep and undying gratitude to my lovely mother, who, though rarely credited for her self-sacrificial deeds, has gone out of her way innumerable times in service to me during these cancer-y ages. Of course, while this particular instance was not particularly notable, it was more for Grace than me, I nevertheless figured, it was time to give her an honorable mention. So anyway, Mom picked up Grace a little more than halfway through the route, and then Johanna and I finished it out. Since the playlist ended, we decided we would just talk, and it was a good conversation. Once we made it to the end, Mom once again was gracious enough to come and pick us up and drove us back home. From there, I drove Grace and Johanna to Joe's house because Monday night, at which point a horrible thing happened. I don't know exactly how to describe the thing that came next. I'm pretty sure I have to commit and just say it, even though it's been a whole week. It's hard to come to terms with this particular reality. But maybe it's best if I just show you. Picture. Do you see both that face and more significantly what it is I am holding? Yes, that is exactly what it looks like. An anime body pillow. And trust me, that decrepit expression is accurately depicting my feelings on the matter. So see, remember when I wrote way back about how one of the things I would appreciate during this cancer time was anime merch, yet I explicitly asked no one to get me a body pillow? Well, Joe took that as a wink wink, don't give me an anime body pillow, which I promise you it was not. And thus, I somehow end up in this horrible situation. On the one hand, the body pillow is very wholesome, and it is of Violet Evergarden. Both things I appreciate. But nevertheless, it is an anime body pillow. And while, when I first began to enter into weebdom, I swore to myself that the one bridge I would never cross was an anime body pillow bridge. Thus, imagine my dismay and genuine emotional distress as Benj, Noah, and Noah, ceremoniously pull Violet from behind their backs and hand her over. I'm not going to lie, I almost didn't take it. I mean, sure, I appreciate the thoughtfulness and all, but an anime body pillow is just a line you just should not cross under any circumstances. But of course, I did take it, because social pressure is stupid, and Joe is quite insistent, and then I found myself saddled with an impossible social dilemma. How can you possibly escape the social suicide of owning an anime body pillow? Obviously, putting it in my bed was out of the question. So my thought was I would have Violet Evergarden ride in my back seat and kind of just chill there as my eternal passenger. And of course, Karina and Johanna tried to warn me that was arguably worse than putting it in my room. But me being largely oblivious to these sorts of things, I didn't listen. Hence this happened. And yes, I did buckle the pillow in, but that's only because I thought it would make it very clear I was doing it ironically. Look, I wasn't clicking clearly, okay? I should have just stuffed Violet Evergarden in the trunk and left it there. But I was trying to salvage the situation, and so I figured if I just made it, obviously outrageous, then people would look past it. It's like when someone seems kind of gay, but then you just lean into it and show it's obviously a joke. That was my thought, right? Well, as Alan made it clear to me a few days later, that was not how it came across. And so, I'm skipping ahead a bit here, but, I can't just move on while Violet Evergarden is just sitting in my back seat. Me, and Liam got together and we talked and decided that aside from stuffing Violet Evergarden in the drawer, which would have the least, which would have left the three social bigwigs financially invested in the whole debacle radically unsatisfied, the best way to possibly save myself was to take the pillow and make it clearly part of an over-enthusiastic anime display. Hence, taking their advice, I have turned the body pillowcase into a harmless Violet Evergarden tapestry, permanently tacked to my wall. And while I grant this doesn't get me all the way out of the doghouse, I think it was, a successful move. That shows my Violet Evergarden, body pillow isn't quite scandalizing. It's just unhealthily eccentric, which is a very, very big improvement. Thus, for all time and eternity, so Violet will stay, tacked to the wall. And don't get me wrong, I love Violet Evergarden. It's an absolutely fantastic anime. And so having a tapestry of Violet isn't all that bad. It's just a body pillow was definitely crossing the line. So yeah, forget about cancer. That was my emotional trauma for this week. In the end, I think it all worked out, but man, that was genuinely stressful. Okay, going back and moving on. After receiving the item not to be named, I then ate food with the Monday Night group, and we all went to Walmart and purchased items for Josh's birthday, since you see he is turning 12. You must recognize that for quite some time now, both myself and other members of the Southgate community have fixated on the ripe age of 12, both mentally and humorously. Hence, Josh, originally wishing to avoid this childish schema, made the mistake of declaring himself 11 last year. Yet, to his chagrin, time marches on for all but the 12, and thus his 12th birthday had finally arrived. And so all of us 12-year-olds decided we would throw a birthday to commemorate his addition to the fold. So we bought 12 Play-Doh tins, a bird calendar, and this little bird toy that honestly is kind of creepy, and then went into his house and inaugurated him into the 12. Honestly, it was a good time. We ended up walking down to Safeway and buying some sweet things. After much deliberation, we did a bunch of small talk, and that was great. I bet you never thought that you would hear me say that sentence out of my mouth. Once that reached its natural conclusion, we drove back to the Jameses and decided we would all try and guess each other's MBTI types. And see, I haven't really touched the Myers-Briggs type since it was rejected due to the meta-analyses all those years ago. But nevertheless, I had this moment where I took the test again with Joel Bartram, and I found it kind of odd that after all that time and, intentional development of character, I still tested as an ENTJ. Hence, I was like, why not try and mess around with my good old friend, the Myers-Briggs again, just for a fun late night activity. So we did it, and it turns out I'm much better at telling you your actual MBTI type than, the test is. I've worked with that framework for so long, I just have an intuitive feel for what MBTI type people are. And in every case, I was basically spot on. Once people actually read the description of the type I gave them, they were like, oh yeah, that's me. I had a bit of a hard time with Noah, though, I must admit, and I got one layer off with Benj, but overall, I'm quite impressed with my performance after all those years. Okay, but the really weird thing is as soon as I started typing people, it was as if my brain reverted to some ancient operating system. I just started seeing everyone through the lens of MBTI all over again. And it wasn't a conscious choice. It was genuinely weird because I actually haven't thought about people like that in so long. But then again, it's not to say it wasn't helpful. I realized the reason I like Neil so much is because he's an ENFJ, which is basically my ideal friend, at least by type. It finally explained to me why, even though, he doesn't have any notable philosophical insights or remarkable character traits, I enjoy his presence so much. Plus, the same lensing helped me figure out Johanna, who's also an ENFJ, and why she's the way she is, but I'll get to that later. Anyway, it was useful, but kind of distracting. It's kind of like having a heads-up display in your thought process, but whenever you look at someone and saw them, you just saw a little floating 4-letter code above their head. So yeah, that was cut a bit short by Benj and Johanna having to head home early, but Joe, Noah, and Karina and Grace and I all went and read through each other's strengths and weaknesses, and that definitely put a bit of doubt in my mind regarding how dead the MBTI really was. They were pretty accurate, if I'm being honest. I mean, it's not as if they were not accurate before, it's just that I'd forgotten the oomph with which those descriptions hit, especially the ENTJ weaknesses, of which there are a disproportionate number, might I add. So yeah, we did that, and then I drove me and Grace home, took a shower, and called it a night. The next day I did pseudo quiet time. I say pseudo because I got kind of distracted. Had Funime, and then talked with Sam briefly, where the conversation was basically come over and rollerblade. Yeah, okay. And so we did. Oh, and so I did. I drove over to their house, and then Sam, Seth, Lily, and I all went rollerblading for the distance of about 9 miles in total. We had a few detours. Look, all of you need to know that I did make it to our destination in a timely manner, but we made this whole trip like a process. Also, Lily did get pretty worn out, but she pushed through like a trooper. After we finished, I went back to their house. The Myers provided me with food, and then Karina and I went on a walk through the nearby neighborhoods. That was good. Probably one of our best walks by my estimation. We had some very straightforward conversations, and I got to tell her about my social game theory, which she seems quite interested in. And yeah, we did that. Also, I sewed 2 of my magic masks together, so now they're back to back. I then, from there, drove home, did food mate, went to Ratio, at which point I decided that maybe I should take a look at the Myers-Briggs meta-analyses again. And lo and behold, guess what I found? So it turns out there never was, in fact, a meta-analysis saying the Myers-Briggs was bunk. Rather, there were 2 peer-reviewed papers, a paper saying Myers-Briggs was bunk, and a meta-analysis which surprisingly enough said the Myers-Briggs was decent, though not great. So somehow, I totally confused those 2 and thought that the paper said what the meta-analysis said. Honestly, I do not know how I made such a massive mix-up. That was a huge mistake. All this time, I thought the Myers-Briggs was dead because, it was decreed by the gods of science, because that's what a meta-analysis is, a science god. When actually, it was merely a plebeian that pronounced his death. And don't get me wrong, the plebeian paper still has some really good points, and it's not like the Myers-Briggs is, home free by any means. But still, it seems like the situation is not nearly as dire as I thought it once was. So yeah, that's honestly kind of embarrassing, especially after I told everyone to eat the Myers-Briggs because it's dead. See, this is why I don't want to output philosophy stuff yet. Imagine I had made this kind of mistake on free will or something. I'd feel absolutely horrible. So yeah, found that out and ranted to it about Alan and Noah for 30 minutes of Ratio. Then from there, Alan, Liam, and I went over Wendy's, grabbed food, and discussed largely interesting things, like this dino killing game. But this is when we discussed how I handled my Violet Evergarden situation, so there's definitely some usefulness in there. And then I went home and went to sleep. Wednesday, I woke up and did a bunch of little things before Grace got home with her wizard teeth extracted from her skull. As Grace was, in the moment, quite emphatic about, pointing out, she was much less out of it than me and Ben had been when we got our wisdom teeth pulled. My argument, of course, was there was much less brain power for her to lose, but, regardless of reason, she wasn't very loopy. I decided to watch some anime with her since she couldn't do much else, and while that went on, I picked out my classes for next semester. As it stands, I think I'm going to be going to school next semester, but I'll be taking 12 of the easiest credits out there. They won't count toward my degree, but they'll keep me in the system and boost my GPA if and when I come back. At the moment, it seems like the best plan for me, especially because since I get paid to go to school, there's no really other way of me making money at the moment. And it's basically the only way I can get the funds to pay for my $6,000 of medical deductible debt that will recur as the new year rolls around. So yeah, I registered for those classes, and then Noah dropped by for an early creek walk, since, he couldn't make the scheduled one. Thus, we got walking, and we had good philosophical conversation, as we walked mostly beside, but not in the creek, because Noah found it apparently too cold. I was able to clear up a few misconceptions that he had thought about my thought processes, which was good. And we also just got to talk about the reasons for Thomas's death in more clarity, which I thought was very helpful. Overall, it was a very good conversation, and I learned a thing or two with Noah sharing when he shared what he had to research on the divine hiddenness literature. Once we made it back, I had to meet up with Joe, Seth, Sam, and Johanna for the scheduled creek walk, which turned out to be difficult as the creek was dried up. Hence, we decided that a lake walk would have to do, and so we walked in circles around the edge of the lake at Spring Creek Cannon Park. Honestly, I still had a good time. From there, Joe and I originally planning to hang out one-on-one, but then I decided that the big brain idea was to take personality tests as a group, and that plan was well received, so we drove back to the Myers, and we did that instead. However, the plan was for me to drive back and grab my computer so we could all, exchange devices, so we'd all have an extra device to take personality tests on. But when I got home, I just changed clothes until I forgot my computer, so that was a big sad. Nevertheless, I got to talk with Johanna on the way and share my big brain thoughts as to why she works the way she does, and it seemed like she found them really useful, so that trip wasn't a waste. Once we reached the Myers, we all settled down and actually took so many personality tests. I think after this, I've just done about every big personality test out there, at least all of the pseudo-reputable ones. Here are the results I saved. I took this sanguine choleric, whatever it's called, test. I actually only heard about people sincerely talking about this on Pines Lake, so I didn't even know its name before this. And I could look it up, but I'm pretty sure you know the test I'm talking about. Boom. I'm phlegmatic. Interestingly, as you can see, the test had a lie detector built into it, which is a big brain move. A few other tests that too. Some sort of validity test. And I actually think that's really smart, since it motivates you to be honest with yourself. That said, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Disorder test had a particularly low validity score. So maybe, I'm working with an ideal with myself and not the actual, real test. Still, if I was being realistic, I could have done it in a more flattering way. The 50% psychopath deviant was clearly not the most flattering score that I received. Now, it turns out that the test is stupidly scored, and any score under 54% is actually an average score. So I'm not a psychopath, yay, but still getting a bit close to that cutoff bar right there. The other test I did didn't give me a flattering review, which is a Hexco test, which actually seemed pretty legit, might I add. It's based on the big 5 traits, and it seemed pretty scientific. So if anyone out there is looking for a potentially useful measure for where you stack up on the population, I recommend it. Anyway, here's what I got for that test. Honestly, I'm pretty average in everything, except for emotionality, which was a little bit of a surprise to me. Though I guess being well-rounded is the goal, so perhaps that's a good thing. Anyway, the not flattering thing is that I was the only one out of the group that got a dark side, which I don't really care to count. But as the name implies, it wasn't particularly flattering. So yeah, that test was fun. Of course, we got to take the Enneagram 2. So here's my results for all you Enneagram lovers. I'm predominantly, I think, an 8. From what I know of Enneagram lore, an 8 checks out. As for the Myers-Briggs result, the same was as always. Solid ENTJ. Also, something interesting that we did that was unique is we decided to all take the MBTI again, but this time answering as the ideal person we wanted to be, not how we actually perceived ourselves. And what was really interesting was every single one of us got an ENFJ or an ESFJ, with the N or S corresponding to if we were sensors or intuitives ourselves. So apparently, extroverted feeling is literally just the cognitive function to rule them all. See, it checks out in a Christian community because, EN/SJs are the classic selfless, care about others, make a difference in the world MBTI types. Basically the type embodiment of Christian virtues. But what I wonder is if we would get the same results in a secular context or even in a different demographic. What if we got a bunch of CEOs together? Would they all be ENTJs or ESTJs? It seems fairly plausible to me that would occur. Plus, the other thought is, say the ideological groups that do share ideal personality type, is that because they're ideological groups, or is that because the ideological groups all share a personality type, and so they're all striving to be the same kind of person? Plus, what about the people that actually have the ideal types in those groups? What about Johanna or Neo, who are actually ENFJs in the Christian communities? Does that mean it's just really easy for them to succeed, or do they have, a ton of pressures to measure up, and then it's worse off for them? So yeah, actually very many interesting questions that results bring up. I would like to explore those at some point. So yeah, that was very interesting. The other test we did that night was an IQ test, which Benj and Joe both blew me out of the water. I got a 118, and Joe got a 131, and Benj got a 128 or something like that. I will say I was genuinely tired, and I took it I don't know, with a bit of a situational bias for the results. But nevertheless, I've never done exceptionally well on IQ tests in general. I've always been high-ish, but not exceptional, between 132 and now 118. So, around that area. But yeah, with that test, my brain was officially fried, and I was like, okay, I'm going home to sleep. And so I did. Overall, though, just as a cursory note, the whole thing was a good time. Definitely going to add that to the all activities we can think of list. The next day I woke up and was hungry for my approximately 3-day fast started that night before. Let me actually explain why I'm doing that actually briefly. So it started with Alan sending me this one paper that was like, yo, before you fast, fast before your chemo. It's good for you. And I was like, doubt. But then I looked up the notion on my peer-reviewed consensus AI, and I was like, oh, there's actually 6 other papers saying the same thing. And I was like, okay, anti-doubt. And basically, what I can gather from reading the abstracts of most of the papers, when one of them all the way through, is that 30 to 60 hours, or no, 30 to 36 hours after your body, you start fasting, it's like, okay, time to use alternative food. And so it seems a lot of like complex biological processes that are basically like, healthy cells, eat less, repair more. And so they do that, and they go into like hunker down mode. But see, your cancer cells are broken, and they suck at going into eat less, repair more mode. And hence the chemo gets slurped up at unusually like high rates by the cancer cells, but at less than usual rates for the healthy cells, according to some papers. And thus increasing the efficacy of the chemo, while, according to some papers, lessening the damage done by the chemo to your normal cells. So, unless you want to read all the actual papers, this is what I got for you. Not gonna lie, even with my immunology understanding, there are definitely parts of those papers that went over my head. So if you wanted to do it though, feel free. Anyway, the thing is, I'd be hungry at this point in time because of the full-fledged fast, almost as almost all the papers agree that you have to like have 0 calories, like pure water, or else the cells don't enter into like hunter down mode. Thus, I actually hit the button for my CSU class registration and then proceeded to build a magic deck with my bulk. From there, I did some small things, helped prepare my new room. I'm moving into Ben's room for chemo. And then I went with Mom and Grace to buy a very nice rug, which is Big Cold. It's hard to describe the nature of this rug, but it's very nice. It's the sort of rug that you just want to lay on. Once I was finished, Joe came over and we played a bit of Magic before Flossie class, and we battled some decks against one another. Then we walked over to the bioengineering building for Flossie class, and everyone began the ultimate flowchart harmonization, which took so much longer than I anticipated. Don't get me wrong, they all made progress, but gosh, it was slow. The next day was Friday, day 1 of chemo. I woke up a bit early and had some time to kill, and did nothing in particular with that time. Then Dad drove me over to the cancer center, and that was a bit rough. See, Dad has this habit of asking a lot of questions when he's stressed, but that's not how I roll at all. Like, I like to listen to music and like mentally prepare myself. So unfortunately, those tendencies clash in a way, and there's some friction. But we resolved it before we reached the chemo center, but still not the best way to start things off. However, as for the actual chemo infusion, that went pretty well. I got this nurse, who was nice, and also a little bit odd. A very INFP vibe from him for sure. He was like kind, but socially awkward, if that makes sense. Here's a picture of me getting drugs. Also, on a unrelated note, I have the tendency to knowledge dump, as I'm going to call it, when I'm nervous. Like, I just ask a bunch of technical, and in this case, medical questions to show off my technical aptitude in the subject matter at hand, probably because I think knowledge in the area of, because knowledge is an area of proficiency for me, and hence it gives me, a sense of control. Thinking back, I did it during my first, U of Cancer appointment as well. And looking back, it's also really strange. My questions are reasonable, but they're also dumb, because obviously, if I really were asking the question and cared to know the answer, I would have just looked it up, instead of asking those people who clearly do not know the answer, and really shouldn't be expected to. So yeah, I identified that unique tendency in myself. Other than that, at that time, the only significant symptom I experienced from chemo was my ankles got really fatigued. They just felt very heavy, as if I had run on only my ankles for 10 miles. Odd sensation. Also, I just felt really tired. But that's probably because, Benadryl, they shoot into your system. However, as I got home, I felt super fatigued and mostly just crashed in my chair and didn't move. However, Mom, Ben, and Dad put in the work for me and basically moved me in while I was in my zombie state. And thus they finished my room, which I honestly love. Here, let me show you what it looks like. First, the best part, the anime decor view. Ben and Mom arranged it so I could see all my anime memorabilia from my corner, which I have greatly enjoyed. As for the other half of the room, boop, and that's how it looks. Pretty soon here, I should be getting a cork board where I can pin up all the cancel letters, which I'm very excited for, and putting that over my desk. But otherwise, the room is largely done. I know the picture doesn't necessarily make it look like it's very cozy, but it is actually very cozy. Anyway, after that, after my family finished setting that up, I was feeling less fatigued, so I headed over to Nancy Sydney's place, where Sydney was kind enough to spend 2.5 hours giving me a haircut of a lifetime. Let me show you the progression. Hair. Oh, and finally, the finished product. Aquinas. And a picture to commemorate her effort. During that whole time, New and Alan read through personality stuff, mostly because I was like, do it! And neither seemed significantly impressed. But yeah, once that finished, I just 100% crashed and slept. The next morning, I woke up at 2:30 a.m., probably because of the steroids, but man, did I have so many big brain philosophy thoughts. I actually just wrote and thought for literally 3 hours until 5:30 in the morning. Mostly because I just, while I wanted to sleep, I had to write them all down before I forgot it. So yeah, once I finally got back to sleep around 6 or so, I was quite tired, but I only slept till 9 for some reason. But honestly, despite the poor sleep and being, day 2 of chemo, I felt fantastic. I mean, my ankles and wrists hurt significantly, which made the whole hours of aforementioned typing very rough. But overall, I felt good. At this point, I was still fasting, and honestly, I think that the short-term fasting is what really carried me. Because from what I hear, it's really rare people feel as good as I do this whole chemo stretch. So anyway, I woke up feeling good but hungry. I had energy again later on the day, and helped the fam with putting some finishing touches on my room. Did some philosophy, and then did some more philosophy before watching Naruto and starting to eat again. Then, that night, the Myers clan came over to watch 86, and we went on a snow walk, which I agree with Ben was a solid 6 out of 10 walk. And Benj, of course, being the lad that he is, appreciated the greatness of my monk haircut. But Johanna, on the other hand, yeah, she was definitely traumatized. Anyway, then Rebecca came over, and Ben took over the social arena until it was time for me to leave. And we did an escape room with Liam at Ratio, with the Ratio group for his birthday. It was a good escape room, don't get me wrong, but I think I pushed myself a little too far, as I definitely was not feeling great by the end of the event. Still, I made it through and went to sleep. The next day at Southgate, I almost made Johanna crack up on stage, which with a strategic hat removal. If you noticed, she seemed really into worship that day. It was unfortunately not a credit to her piety. The rest of the day at church, I definitely got quite a few double takes, and Ty Laws came up and, looking genuinely distressed, offered to shave his head out of sympathy. I turned him down, of course, because that would be to unnecessarily proliferate suffering, aka Simone de Var, you're wrong. But yeah, played a very long and somewhat arduous Magic game before Noah and I decided we should get some tea and thus go to the Myers. And because tea is more easily attained there, hence Noah, Joe, and I and the Myers clan headed back to their house, and Noah and I sipped tea in the living room. Tea is really good, contrary to anything Mr. Myers may say. And honestly, I feel like people should drink tea more often, kind of like how they smoke cigars. Not a one-to-one correspondence like time amount, but I feel like people should make having a smoke like be an activity. No, I feel like people should make drinking tea like having a smoke. Anyway, yep, that's a loose sentiment of mine. Anyway, after that, we all journeyed to Walmart to join Benj in picking up lemon juice. Once we got back, Noah, Sam, and I all went on a walk. We played another Magic game, at which point my social battery exhausted itself, and I decided to work on this live stream a little bit before heading home, just as the Myers birthday party's festivities were beginning. At some point, I would like to be there for Myers' birthday, but as it stood, the day was not the day for it. From there, I took a meandering drive and was given a really good hash brown soup by Sydney. It was big tasty. And then I cracked a letter as I was in need of an emotional pick-me-up. Honestly, your guys' letters have carried me. I have cracked very few of those, but the ones I have opened have been like a shot of adrenaline into my emotional system. So, for reals, thanks. Anyway, upon being revitalized, I then responded to people, worked on this live email, and then did some thinking and worked on putting those thoughts into a Google Doc. And that was my day. Now, as for yesterday I felt all right. Not great, but still good enough to function. And I started off the day with some quiet time, which was good. And then I had Funame. Basically, straight from there, I went to Joe's house and we walked around and talked for about 2 hours or so. It was good, but not quite the same as it used to be, which is a bit sad. Joe's in a new stage of life at this point in time, and so we basically just talked about how that is and why it is and what to do about it. Once we got back, we did Magic for like 3 hours straight, in which Joe repeatedly crushed all of my decks, which was a big goof. And then people started showing up for Monday nights, and we all just kind of like waited around while engaging in small talk until Noah arrived, inhaled his food, and then we got D&Ding. Neo wasn't there for the session yesterday since he was sick, and out of respect for my immunocompromised state, decided to stay home. But without him, the party got so much more chaotic. All hopes of story and plot were yeeted, and basically the party just fought a bunch of bugs. But yeah, it was still good. I'm glad everyone had a good time, and they got to meet Travis, who is an absolute hit. After that finished, we all watched more Bofurry, which was kind of bad, honestly. Bofurry has just like been downgraded as it's gone on, or at least my perception of it has. Basically, everyone is always overpowered, and no monster even feels like it might be threatening. So you just get a lot of overpowered, people not having actually any challenges. And then, upon concluding that, I drove home and rested. As for today, I woke up at noon for the first time in ages and felt great, so that's good. Basically, all I've done today is work on this live demo, do a monk photo shoot with Dad, and then eat some food. And that's all I have to say. Just so you know, I am thinking about switching over to a bi-weekly schedule for these emails because it would be able to fill my chemo regime. So if the next email doesn't come out for 2 weeks, fear not, I'm not dead. Not saying it will take 2 weeks, I'm just saying it might. Just want to make clear that the abundant number of you that would be desperately distraught should my life demos not come out should, chill. But regardless, there you have it. The first week of life demos as a cancer patient. I'm super grateful this first round has gone as well as it has, and from what I've read, I'm taking chemo exceptionally well, so I've been super blessed. Still, it's only downhill from here, as chemo is chemotive, so prayers are very much appreciated, and I will talk to you all later.